Okay, so now that we know how the cable is going to work, the next thing to do is to work out the travel limit, the switches. So we've got two switches to fit. So one will be the extend out limit and the other one will be extending in limit. So what I've got in mind on that is a push-pull system. So I've got some servo rods. So these are 1.25 millimeter diameter, and they are around about 170 or 180 millimeters long, stainless steel, and they've got a Z formed on the end of it. So what I'm thinking is to use one of these rods on the inside to run as the arm is running out. This stop end will pull on this end here, so that will activate a switch, and the opposite way would be to, when the arm is retracting, is to push against the pin on the end to activate the retract switch. So I've drilled a hole through the end there for this to pass through. There's two switches to fit on the end. That's the two limit switches, and these little components here are the actuators. The steel rod will go through, and then that will be locked into position by the little M2 grub screw. So there's one for the pull and one for the push. So I think the next thing to do is to start assembling. So I'll put the motor into the motor housing, so that if I get it like so, pass that through and into there, making note of the polarity, because we've got some diodes to fit fairly shortly. So I've got to make sure the correct wire goes on to the correct switch. Okay, so I've cut away the center terminal, leaving the outside terminals, and soldered the diode across. 1N 4148. So exactly the same. I've soldered them on the same way on both switches. So the terminals are marked C, NO and NC. I don't know whether the camera can actually make that out. And I've gone across the common and the NC, which is normally closed. So in its current state, with the switch open, the current is allowed to pass through the two terminals, so it can pass in both directions. Once the switch is triggered, it's open circuit through the switch, but current is still allowed to flow through the diode, but only in one direction. So that coincides with the movement of the screw thread. So if it's screwing up towards it, it will shut off the motor, and then you reverse current, so the motor will spin the other way, moving it away from the switch, and then the switch makes contact again. So that's probably the easiest and the quickest way to describe what's going on. So we've got the motor now in its housing, ready to go. So there's an M2 by 16 bolt holding the top, down through the top there, and on the side is an M2 by 2 grub screw. So I've got the limit switches fitted now onto the tail stock of the motor housing. So the motor's in. I've got the wire from the motor going up. Let me see this, track this. So one of the wires from the motor is coming out to this terminal here, and you solder it on. It goes through the switch and out the other side to a temporary plug that I just soldered on just to for testing purposes. And the other side, we've got the other wire coming out underneath the switch there, terminated onto the switch there from the motor, and then the wire coming in from the plug comes around and terminates onto the other side of the switch as well. So we've got the expanding switch fitted, and we've got the retract switch fitted. So I can now pass the rod through the end of the motor, through there, and that'll go all the way through and come out the top there. So then that's ready for the cap to be fitted, and the same the other side. So we got the rod will pass through that side and ready to connect up to this switch here. So it's just a case of manipulating the wire around. So that's that. Now the next thing to do is to actually screw the motor into the housing and then feed this rod. So I'll just trim the end of this rod up a little bit, and then that rod will be fed in through the arm and come through and emerge out the end here, ready for the cap. I've got the motor attached now. I've got the ribbon cable attached. Also the limit switches are installed. So it's just a quick look around to see how it's all come together. So the limit switches are activated by push-pull rods. So these are actually servo rods that I've trimmed down, and we've got the extend. So once it's extended, this edge here will butt up onto the end of this rod and pull it forwards. So as it pulls forwards, it operates this switch here. So that's the extending limit switch, and on the other side we've got the retract side. So we've got the end of the push rod there, so as the motor or the arm comes back, it pushes on that pin and will activate this limit switch here.